The pandemic has reminded us of the cost of not having adequate technology, systems, and strategies to combat infectious disease. Over the past 2 years, healthcare and pharmaceutical industries have delivered a modern scientific miracle, and it did all this in record time. The victories were built upon years of scientific research that required innovation and partnership beyond borders. Let's hear from our next speakers what medical breakthroughs will the future bring. Sanjeev is a professor of molecular parasitology and medicine from St. George's University of London. He completed a degree in Cambridge, a medical degree at Oxford, studied malaria in Thailand before completing a PhD in molecular medicine at Oxford. Sanjeev is also a scientific advisor to the WHO. Without further ado, please welcome Professor Sanjeev.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to say what an honor it is to be invited by Khazanah to present today, and to thank Khazanah, not just for the invitation, but for being such incredible hosts, actually, and to Casey for a very kind introduction. Now, I just recall from this morning's wonderful talk by Professor Ha-Joon Chan on edible economies, a memory that was triggered by this talk. I went to a British boarding school, and so I would like to be able to write a coda to his book called Inedible Economies. And the way I survived was to carry with me a packet of chilies. And actually, it made me very popular also, because people used to come around begging for some of my chilies. So, look, it's an honor actually also to be able to present something slightly different from what you've been hearing. We are in a pandemic century. Homegrown, Nipah. 1998, 2002, SARS-CoV-1, 2014, Ebola, COVID-19 still with us, and Ebola is still rearing its head in Uganda, even as we speak. I think we haven't forgotten yet the feelings of paralysis and helplessness. When you can't diagnose, you can't treat, and you can't prevent. And you can't even take care of your healthcare workers. When outbreaks start, what we need are eyes to monitor the outbreak. What this means is that we need high-quality diagnostics. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is low quality, large volume diagnostics starts to come onto the market. And this is usually motivated by unethical profiteering. And of course, this applies to some of the other measures as well that are so much needed during an outbreak. For example, personal protective equipment. None of us can escape from these types of impacts. In fact, the recent Lancet Commission report has identified some of the global failures in handling the pandemic with remarkable clarity. And if you look at some of these recommendations that are summarized, I've just picked a few points, you'll see actually that they echo very much our CEO's comments this morning about the problems in tackling environmental challenges. Same, as you might say. If there was any silver lining at all, it might be that now all of us sitting here have an understanding of what lateral flow tests are, of what RDK, rapid diagnostic kits, are, of what RT-PCR means, and how these diagnostics impact on our day-to-day lives. Now, I grew up actually probably at some stage unconsciously, maybe consciously thinking about diagnostics. Because I used to live in a small flat in northern Tanzania above a clinic that my parents started. They're both doctors. They left India during the very difficult times of partition, went to Tanganyika in those days, pre-independence, under the aegis of the British rulers at the time. And they set up this small clinic in a deprived part of the town. And I used to see kids coming with their mothers for treatment, but the one thing they did set up there was a diagnostic facility. They had a technician who had the ability to make blood films and examine them under a microscope to look for other parasites as well. And so the treatments that were needed for a particular child could be focused and optimized to treat the problem that the child was presenting with. It was not flying blind. And I think that lesson really has stayed with me. What's astonishing is, of course, that what was being used at the time, still being used as a gold standard for the diagnosis of, for example, malaria, is the microscope. Yeah, we do have rapid tests now, but actually when you're monitoring the response to treatment of a patient or when you want to really confirm a difficult infection, you still have to go back to the microscope. More than 100 years after this instrument was used to first identify parasites and diagnose them in the first place. It's really this observation that brought me first, I think, into the area of innovation and working with industry. And it goes like this. More than 10 years ago, I met an inventor, a guy called Jonathan O'Halloran. He was the chief scientific officer of a small startup at that time called Quantum DX. He's now the CEO of the company. He came to St. George's one day where we work, and he told me he'd worked out a method to diagnose infections within a few minutes, starting from a small sample of material and without any need of a laboratory. He said he wanted to build machines that could work like laboratories, but were portable and could be operated by almost anyone, anywhere. Basically, to be able to provide a lab under a tree. And the other thing that struck me when he was talking to me about this was that he was very keen to work on neglected diseases. So I thought this was a revolutionary idea. I'm, of course, not an entrepreneur myself, but I was so taken with this that I actually made a small investment in this startup myself. And what we did at the time, because it was desperately, of course, in need of finance, is we wrote a grant to the European Union under the Innovations Call. And that grant was scored actually the highest in that. We got a few million euro to be able to kick things off. And with that money, we started looking at how to improve the diagnosis of malarial parasites. And the exciting thing was that, we were trying to work out what the best treatment would be from this diagnostic. In other words, optimize the treatment at the time the patient needs it, next to the patient, by the bedside. And we're also working on other diseases, sexually transmitted infections, tuberculosis, and so on. And then what happened is, of course, COVID-19 came along. Now, pandemic has accelerated advances. We are all aware of this, not only in diagnostics, but also in vaccines and in other measures. And what happened is that the company repurposed this platform to produce the first diagnostic for SARS-CoV-2. And the company valuation has gone, as it happens, from that small startup to now 150 million pounds or north of that. So Quantum DX made this technology a box, and then if you see there, a little cassette, a cartridge, which the second stage of this, the second version of this, can now diagnose 3 infections: flu, SARS-CoV-2, and another infection called RSV, which are very hard to tell the difference between clinically. Small sample, transfer into that cartridge, into the box, and you press a button, and the answer comes out in about 30 minutes, laboratory quality. And there I am, trying it out in my kitchen. So it really is portable, and with obviously the results able to be uploaded to the cloud. Now, at the time, you'll remember that you've got a cartridge, you've got 3 tests. It's a PCR assay. It's a laboratory quality result, which means that inevitably it's going to be a little bit expensive. What we also wanted to do is to work in a way that diagnostics could deliver large volumes, accurate lateral flow type tests that were accessible, but still of the highest quality. And we, again, because of COVID, teamed up with a company called Melogic. At that time, it was a for-profit company. In fact, it was started by the inventor of the clear blue pregnancy test, which is, of course, the most widely used pregnancy test anyway, self-test. And they wanted to focus on pandemic preparedness. And remarkably, during the time of COVID, what they have done is they've transitioned from a for-profit to a CSR enterprise, so that anything that they make in terms of sustainability is put back into the operations, either to obviously lower cost of goods to people who buy them, or to be able to innovate in new research areas. And the areas that they're working on are listed there, and you can see there are some infections like dengue and Nipah that are highly relevant locally, and also we would like to now develop tests for the predisposing infection for cervical cancer, which is HPV. And from their transition from Melogic, they have become a company called Global Access Diagnostics, GADX. There's one other aspect of GADX which has been attractive to us right from the start, and that is that they have been very keen to transfer their technology to areas where it is most needed. So they have successfully done this now, for example, in terms of manufacture for rapid tests to Senegal and to Pakistan. And I was very encouraged. I happened to be at another networking event a few months ago with the Islamic Development Bank. And what GADX are doing is very much in line with one of the pillars of what ISDB is also trying to put into place, or is successfully putting into place, which is South-South relationships, reverse linkages, they call it. So, these types of approaches can change the global political landscape and the balance of technology very quickly, and with direct impacts on the lives of the most deprived. And they provide solutions, for example, where none are available. But we don't think it's enough, actually, to be able to deliver and manufacture high-quality diagnostics only. We think that it's also very important that we should be able to provide treatments, solutions for patients as well, that are affordable and safe. Because for most people in most parts of the world, obtaining medical treatments for conditions like cancers is beyond the reach. Or if they can afford it, it is as a result of a financial catastrophe for the families involved, which has generational implications. Well, that's why Dr. Yolanda Augustin, from whom you'll hear tomorrow, and I set up Cadet. And the intention of Cadet, which is a CSR, is in its title. It's the Center for Affordable Diagnostics and Therapeutics. And actually, it's Yolanda's commitment to bringing these advances, these types of projects to Malaysia that makes it so interesting, an idea, I hope, both for Malaysia and Malaysians to be able to lead on the sorts of advances that we're proposing. Now, we all know the aspirin story. Aspirin, very good for pain, good for fevers. But look how it has been repurposed over the years. It's now being used in the management of heart disease, being used in some cancers as a preventative, an extraordinarily versatile drug. And the concept here is that something that is already useful, is already affordable and accessible, already safe, at least its toxicity is understood after its widespread use, has incredible power to be turned to other uses. And what we would like to do as part of our Cadet program is to repurpose another drug called artesunate. Now, artesunate was, there's an interesting story actually about its discovery. The Vietnam War was actually the source of the discovery of artesunate, because Ho Chi Minh was noticing that more of his soldiers were dying from malaria than from combat. So he called up Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, and he said, please, can you help us with this problem? And this was in the late 60s, and Mao Zedong put more than 50 institutions in China to work to discover new antimalarials. And within a short space of time, they had identified artesunate. And artesunate is in the history books, the Chinese history books, for more than 1,500 years as being useful in the management of fevers. And Tu Youyou, who is shown here in the middle, managed to extract successfully from Artemisia annua, the plant, sweet wormwood, to make this class of antimalaria, originally artemisinin, then artesunate. And it has turned out to be one of the most successful treatments for malaria. We use it in combination with other antimalarials. Hundreds of millions of doses used. And she was quite rightly honored in 2015 with the award of a Nobel Prize for this discovery. There are more than 1,000 laboratory studies on the use of artesunate to kill cells in the laboratory that are cancer cells. But actually, we were the first to do a pilot study, a rigorous randomized double-blind control trial, small numbers, just 20 patients, in London, in St. George's, where I work, to show that it is worth pursuing artesunate in the management of bowel cancer. And so, together with Dr. Yolanda and others, we've expanded this trial into a phase 2 study. And we have now developed a program in the last 5 years, and I suppose in a way COVID-19 allowed us to think a little bit more deeply and to explore some of the scientific experiments that give support to considering the use of artesunate for some of these other cancers, including cervical cancer, leukemias, all done in collaboration with teams globally. And then finally, nasopharyngeal cancer, which is a particular problem, as some of you may already know, in places like Sarawak. And we are very keen that for the next phase of implementing these studies and also for encouraging the manufacture of artesunate, we would like this to be Malaysia-centered, if at all possible. So Cadet would like to center here as a regional hub for ASEAN. And building on the sorts of strategies that ISDB has already been discussing, we want to increase South-South collaborations to make these sorts of advances available to partners even in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think, just to finish off a little bit, the combination of strong science, the capacity to implement clinical trials, links with relevant industry, the know-how to make these drugs or diagnostics, I think will allow us to really deliver affordable innovations in the healthcare space. And the aim is to do this as rapidly as possible because the urgency and the needs are great. Democratizing diagnostics needs new platforms. Platforms of the type that I've illustrated, which can be turned to address local needs. Democratizing therapeutics needs repurposed drugs because they're cheap, their safety profile is well understood, and they can also be made readily available. They are accessible. And these advances can immediately empower communities by putting in place healthcare pathways that can access individuals that are otherwise neglected. And we're also very fortunate to work with Malaysian leaders in the field. We've teamed up, for example, with Professor Wu Yinling and Professor Adiba, and Professor Wu Yinling, they've been leading on program ROSE to allow access for diagnostics for HPV. And we would love to be able to accelerate that process and empower the local communities more by, for example, making really high-quality tests affordable for immediate results. So you are shortcutting healthcare pathways. I want to end now, but just with a quote from one of the greatest thinkers of the last century, Richard Feynman. He wrote very simply that a great deal more is known than has been proved. And I think nowhere is this sort of sentiment more relevant than in the era of echo chambers and social media. Clinical trials is what allows us to move from what is known to what is proven. And as Feynman implies, this can take time and effort, and there are no shortcuts. And so, as we are expanding our work here in Malaysia through this program and portfolio of clinical trials for cancers and diagnostics, we really hope that some of you are going to be equally excited and inspired as we are. And so, thank you all for your very kind attention. Terima kasih.